and welcome. My name's Eric Price, and I'm the owner of Japanime Games, and we are here to talk about game design, meaning board games, tabletop games, card games, that kind of thing. And I have some of my friends here, some of which I work with, some are just people I know. We had one person that was supposed to be coming that did not make it from Japan. Kuro, who's a game designer we work with quite a bit. He had an accident on the way to the airport, but he's okay. He's okay, but he missed his flight. So he didn't make it here. Hopefully I'll bring him next year. We'll see. But I've got a few other people here, and they are, well, that's me, actually. So I'm the president of Japanime Games, and these are some of our games that we make, and, well, I can tell you more about those later. But then we have Brett over here.
Hello.
He's currently a Texan.
Yes.
Are you a Texan now, or is it official?
I mean, I've been here
Did you convert to the taco life?
Where were you? Where were you at?
Chicago.
Oh,
He was a Chicagoan,
Yes.
but now he's at He lives in San Antonio.
Yes.
And he made this amazing game, Love Battle High School, which is our best-selling board game of the weekend. So, go Brett! It's doing quite well. People love it, and most of our games we originally actually bring over from Japan, and we localize them and into other languages. But Brett's game is done between himself as the game designer and an artist friend of his, Adam Swanson. And people love it. They love this pop art style, and it's an anime harem board game. It's very cool. Brett, do you have anything you'd like to talk about yourself, your game, your life? Well, let's not get into your life right now.
No.
No.
Yeah, let's not. No, I mean he hit the important parts about where I'm from and what I've been doing. Yeah, this was my first successfully published game, so there'll be more to come that you'll be hearing about shortly.
Yeah, so Jason just asked me if this was an anime. It's not an anime, it's not an IP, but it was based off of a common anime trope, which is the anime harem, where all of these girls are chasing the hero of the story, whose name is Hiro, around the high school, and you're trying to get Hiro matched up with the girl that you think he should be with. So you're manipulating the story throughout the whole game, and it's very fun. And there's game demos in our booth in the exhibit hall at booth 501. Just walk in the exhibit hall, you'll see us.
Strangely, people have come up to me and told me how much they enjoy the anime.
So,
nice.
that's excellent.
That's funny.
People ask for manga of the game.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we'll work on that next.
Yeah, someone said maybe they're from the future, so
I
you
think-
shouldn't laugh at them.
You should never laugh at people from the future. Okay, and then we have Jason. Hey, Jason.
Hello. How are you two doing?
Don't forget, all of Twitch is
All
watching
right.
us.
All right. What's up, Twitch?
Okay. So Jason has several games that he's released. We're working with Jason on a game called Onamaru that's coming out next year. Would you like to tell people a little bit about yourself?
I see you have
Jason
a
on the
picture
Game
of me
of
on
Thrones.
the Iron Throne there.
Yeah.
That's nice.
The Iron Throne War.
Yeah. All right.
He actually won the game
Yes.
of Thrones.
I did. Bad choice. Poor choice. Okay. What was the
Better
question?
ending than the show.
Would you like to tell people about yourself, your games, your life, not your life? Just a bit about your games, maybe.
Sure. I have Big Kid Games, which is a board game publishing company for family-friendly games, themes that are suitable for all ages, more or less. And then we have an imprint brand, Penguin and Panda Productions, and that's the company that did the game on the right, Onimaru, which Eric with Japanime Games is picking up as well. And it's a Japanese comic book-esque setting where you are playing heroes from Japan and bordering regions to defeat Oni that are coming through this Shadow Gate. Anyway, we have another anime-themed board game coming up early next year, too, that we hope to be working with Eric on. So that's me. Hi.
That's you. Onamaru is really cool because it's got deck building aspects to it, and it's a co-op game, and you build a character. What would you call it? A character board? Character tray?
Yeah, there's a plastic tray where all of your components that comprise your character's skills and techniques and abilities house.
So
and
you can slide
create
the cards all over
Yeah,
it.
you can create your dude however you want, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
Pure
Very
character, custom
customized.
creation. Yeah.
Very customized. You put the dice in the tray, the cards,
Yeah.
build out the whole thing. I think it looks awesome. But now we're going to listen to David Killingsworth. I love your name, Dave.
Thanks. I've had it my whole life.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It's a good one to keep.
Owner, creator, chief everything officer is how I usually do it, CEO of Solar Flare Games. We just put out Robotech Crisis Point, which is our second Robotech game and our 10th game in the last 5.5 years. So I do the design work, I do the publishing, kind of everything. So it's labor of love.
David of all trades.
Yeah.
So, did you design all the games that you published?
Yes.
Do you have co-designers or?
There's various. We have a kind of interesting conversation. I have one game that somebody's listed as a co-designer on, and then everything else was kind of, it spawns out of my head. I sit down and do all the primary design work, and then I get with my friends. I have two buddies who I call them my development engineers. I do the core, and then build it out, and then we start playing it, and then we decide whether it sucks or not. And then we start kind of tweaking it with aspects of my friends who I consider as the development engineers, the developers. I'm the designer, they're the developers, and we kind of push the game from whatever the core is to something that's more full game than just concept, and then we
Okay.
go from there.
And so Dave has a couple of Robotech games he's made, which so have we under Japanime. And so it's cool to have Dave here. He's local.
Yep.
I live in Portland, Oregon, by the way, but I kind of live all over because I travel from convention to convention. But it's cool to get insight from Dave regarding his Robotech games as well. So, first steps, how babies are made, talking about game design, creating games that you love, working with prototypes. Have any of you all created any board games before or aspired to do so? Anyone? Anyone? But you like to learn more about it anyway. All right. So we're going to talk a bit about what you might do if you're creating a prototype for a game, where to go to get pieces for games, design ideas for cards, and that kind of thing. Who would like to talk about that? Game designer people.
First steps.
First steps.
Well, obviously the first step is you have an idea, right? And you don't have a game until you have something on the table that you can play and test your idea with. So that's the first step, is figuring out how to make a thing to play this game that you have in your head with.
Yeah, for me, it's a whole lot of pen and paper. I was saying the other day to somebody, I go to a place and I'll buy a ream of cardstock and have it chopped into whatever size I need, and then it's write everything by hand, and then we play with it, and we stickers over the top of it, scratch it out, whatever. Our very first game we did called Thrash Car. I started using different colors of ink to scratch out and make the changes as we were developing the prototype. Oh yeah.
To identify the different
Everybody's like, "What
iterations.
color are we playing with this week?" The red one. Anything that's red, that's the primary text. And so, because it had 200-300 cards in it, and trying to make them
right.
over and over. And I have a little bit of OCD, so I tend to have a habit of, once we change something, I make a whole new prototype by hand every time. And so, like me, I try to keep it local. I like to keep my hands on it. So I have some stock designs in my Photoshop, and I load all the cards, and I run over to FedEx, Kinko's, and I print them out, and then I cut them up, and then we play with them. And then lately with the new one, I take one of my other games, I open it up, and then I basically sleeve it, and then put all the inserts in front of the card, so we can kind of play it with something that feels real, and it's a little easier to get people to play something that doesn't look like you cut up a bunch of paper. So, and then once you get farther down the line where it's something you want to invest some real money into, you can bring Game Crafter and a couple of the other places like that. You can actually submit stuff and have them build you something.
And then you do a lot of play testing.
Yeah.
Some people may not have fun, but generally speaking, it's a lot of fun to play test games, help the designers see where their games could use some improvements and all of that. And there's a lot of playtesting groups, people just in local game stores or at conventions. There's conventions that are built around that, like Protospiel, where people are game industry people are getting together just to play their games and get feedback from other designers. So that's really the next step once you make that prototype. But I also have this picture here about one of our games that we released recently, which is Kamigami Battles. Kind of an interesting thing. We originally made these prototype editions of the game, all these cards, and you'll see the ones on the left that say test on them. We didn't have all the artwork ready yet, but we wanted to play through it and learn more about how we could improve the game before we finalized and published it. So actually on our Kickstarter campaign, we had a high-level pledge where anybody that pledged the highest level would get a early edition of the game, just to try it out. You can see a couple of the cards there have the artwork on them. But I would say something like 15% of the cards we had the art for already. But then we printed something like 150 copies of this game to send out to all of our backers right after the Kickstarter campaign was over. And we let them play it with their local groups and give us all their input and their feedback, and sent that to the game designer, who then took what he liked and ignored what he didn't like. But there was a bit of that.
As they should.
But we found a lot of interesting input, and also helped out with redesigning the rule book a bit too, and that's really important. Just as important as designing the game and making sure everything's well balanced, making sure that your rule book explains the game well. That's one of the biggest challenges, where the person designing the game writes a rule book and it's like, hey, I know how this game works. And they think, oh, it looks fine when they read through it. But then somebody else reads it, and of course, the comprehension might not be quite as good. So when we're designing rule books, we also like to have a whole lot of people read the rule book that know nothing about the game, so people can try out the game and learn it without having to be taught the game. That's a pretty common thing. But then you'll see, as my computer goes out here, there we go. On the right, the final edition of those same cards once we got all the artwork done. So there was a lot of money that had to be spent on the artwork for this game. I don't even remember off the top of my head, but something like 200 pieces of art that we had to commission. And so we ran the Kickstarter campaign. A lot of that was to get the funding to buy all the art. And in the end, the game was pretty much ready at the end of the campaign. But we redesigned and reformatted some of it after the play testing. But then at the end, when we got all of the artwork done, and we were able to finally publish it. So that's Kamigami Battles. It's a very cool game. Do you guys have anything you'd like to say about play testing?
It's the most important thing. Like, other than having a good game that looks awesome, play test the fuck out of it. I mean, so you guys were here earlier. You four just jumped in. Are any of you board game designers or aspiring board game designers? Yeah.
Hooray!
Yeah. So
Cool.
he's pointing. You're getting singled out. Cool. That's where it starts, right? I mean.
Yeah, that's where it starts as a hobby.
Yes. And then you get
Downhill
sucked
from
in.
there.
Yes.
Downhill from there. That's kind of like me and mountain bikes. It was a hobby, and then I went downhill from there.
Oh. I see what you're doing.
Oh.
Yeah, you need dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of play tests to iron out all the kinks, potential kinks.
Friends, family, strangers,
Yeah. And then,
random
of course,
hobos on the street.
the last series of tests, once you have the systems and everything implemented, the rule book almost complete, then you would do blind play tests, which is you give someone the game and the rule book, and you let them do it on their own, try to figure out and play it, and get feedback from that.
And even then, it's never perfect.
Yeah,
We
no.
had-
It's never perfect, but you
That's
have
not
to
a
know
thing,
when to
yes.
say
Yeah.
when.
Right.
Like when we did Crisis Point,
Yeah.
we had literally 20 people who had no idea what Robotech was, any of that. Read the rule book, and they're like, "This is great." And they had no problem with it. And we got all the way out into the world and launched it. And one of the first people I sent a pre-order to said, "Oh, by the way, nowhere in your rule book does it explain what this symbol means."
No.
And we went,
Were they right?
"Yes."
Oh.
Now we went, "Well, but if you played Force of Arms, which was the first game, you'd know what that symbol meant." And everyone went,
Yeah,
and-
that's
and
the
we-
reading
and we-
comprehension
And it was
thing. but-
it's literally been.
Or
the
you think you know it.
Yeah, it was literally one of the only things in the entire. And it was the first person that got a copy went.
Ugh.
As a developer, you're like, "Dang it!" And you just got.
Then you were like, well, you got to buy my first game.
"Yeah, exactly."
Then you'll understand.
Yeah. Well, it is a series. It is
Yeah.
based. I wanted everybody to have all 3 games so they could play the TV show.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was a silly little. The symbol is kind of self-explanatory to anybody who plays games. But what it was that person bought it because it was Robotech, not because they played board games. And they
Right.
went, I don't know what this means. And we went,
Sure.
dang it. So always make sure you have a place to go publish your errata and your facts as well, which is we use BoardGameGeek.com a lot
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, we've got a whole section on our website for all of our games where we have any kind of errata, the rulebook PDF downloads, or updated PDF cards when we have updated the text later on. For us, a lot of times we are localizing Japanese games, and sometimes we have a translator that then gives the final edits to the editor. Well, then the editor does the final edits, but nobody checked the translator's work. So in the end, we had some cards that were not the same as the original Japanese. The English was just fine, but parts of the cards were just missing, which the editor, of course, didn't catch because he didn't read the original Japanese. So that's a whole nother aspect. Now we work with several translators, so translators can check translators' works before we even give it to the editor. What's next?
Anybody got any questions about playtesting?
Anybody have any playtesting questions? Yes.
Let's say you're trying to get your game play tested. What are some ways to get more people? Because I can play test with my friends and my family till the cows come home, but to get strangers' eyes on the game, what are some good ways to get it out there?
I think there's 3 things that are pretty easy to do. One is find local groups on Facebook. Like I know there's one in Dallas. So
Or a meetups.
Yeah, so if you're from the area, there's probably groups of either other designers that you can meet with and play test, or there might just be people like board game groups that you can go to and have them play test for you. The other is what kind of Eric mentioned earlier, is that there are specific conventions or programs within larger conventions for playtesting, Protospiel, Unpub, Double Exposure, stuff like that, where that offer specific playtesting tracks. Or you can usually set up stuff with your local game stores, or like you mentioned yesterday, libraries.
Libraries. I even have so much. There's some colleges have game design classes and stuff now, and that's a really good place. If you're like, hey, I'm a blah, blah, you guys, would you guys like to do this one night? And I had to drive an hour and a half for it one night, but I got some of the best feedback on one of my games ever. Was a group of aspiring game designers really will love to give you a lot of feedback, because it's everybody has an idea of how it's done. We've all been doing it for a while, and you never know where the really good idea is going to come from, and it's always good to listen.
He wasn't mic'd, so I'll go ahead and reiterate the question for the online audience. He was asking how to get your prototype out there for people to play test. How do you let people know about it, etc. Was that the gist of it?
Yeah, just where do you find an audience? Really?
Where do you find an audience, right? Yeah, another piece of feedback would be there are specific prototyping events in most major cities. Proto ATL in Orlando, Portland, San Antonio. I'm not sure if there's one in San Antonio.
They-
A lot of big
Yeah.
cities.
Like
will have
Unpub comes around with PAX South.
Right.
That's about the only.
so like a proto,
And Gamefest should do that too,
yeah,
don't you think?
sure.
Hosting board
So
games.
proto insert city name. And those are specific events for designers that just to bring their prototype in, have people play it, check it out, test them, get feedback.
Here in Dallas, they have BoardGameGeek.com. They have 2 conventions, one in May and one in November. And since it's only board games, only for board games, they have a bunch of stuff set up where people can do prototype, and you're talking to a crowd that does nothing but play board games. So there's a lot of opportunity for that here in this area.
How long would you guys say that you like to play test a game before you're done?
Depends how many times I've recycled a mechanic.
Yeah?
Yeah. So I have a series that I work on where the math underneath is the same. So the play testing is more about the first one's every person for himself. The second one's co-op. So I didn't have to break the math down a second time. It was just
Sure.
making sure that. So it kind of depends. Like until somebody doesn't stop in the middle of it and actually break it. For me, I had a guy sit down one time. He goes, "Oh, this math won't work, and here's why." And it was the first play test we ever did, and it was so broken we threw that game away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't fix it, huh?
No.
Right. I think other than the nitpicky stuff for me, I'm looking for a feeling. Like I want whatever game I'm working on, I have an idea of how I want the people playing that game to experience it. So obviously, like, if there's any kind of mechanic stuff that's messed up, that'll come out just in the nature of playing the game. But the biggest thing for me is, are people getting out of the game when they're playing it what I'm trying to achieve with that game? So, like, for Love Battle High School, it's a goofy game about 5 girls chasing a dude around, and there's all kinds of crazy jokes and tropes, and so if they're, nobody's going to sit down and play that because they expect Scythe, or something.
I guess that game didn't need to have quite as the intensive play testing. Is that what you mean by that?
No, actually,
like mathematically.
strangely, I mean, I probably did almost like a year and a half of play testing. No,
Do you find like I do when it's less about a hardcore mechanic, it actually needs more playtesting because you need to know the people are going to enjoy. My experience is with something with a lot of heavy math and mechanics and conflict, you almost have to play it less because everybody's kind of head to head.
because like once you get that equation
Yeah,
down,
once you get that equation down, it's just bashing the parts together until
Sure.
nothing cracks. Whereas like when we do stuff that's more about fun and light, and it's more about playing it over and over, watching the people, because when you start seeing the cheering and the smiling and the laughing, that's more important than sometimes the mechanics,
Right,
and that requires more testing a lot of times.
The enjoyment of the
Yeah.
game
Yeah. I
is
feel like-
pretty important.
I feel like that was definitely true for at least for Love Battle, because so like Japanime goes to a lot of game cons and a lot of anime cons, and there's a little bit of a crossover between the types of people you see there, but in general, it's a very different crowd. So testing it with anime gamers and with hardcore board game gamers, it, would yield often different results, and like I wanted to make sure that like a group of all women would enjoy it, or like younger, older, just different demographics that had at least that cross section of I like anime and I like board games, together. So, but yeah, I think it would be
Yeah.
easier like if you have a game that's just like, oh well, mathematically and mechanically, boom, 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 these are the things that fit. Then it's kind of like interlocking pieces that
Yeah,
you
we
can
did
kind of see that right
Yeah,
away.
we did Crisis Point. I basically found 2 math students that were graduate math students and said, "Here's the spreadsheet. Can you break that?" And then I made them play it. Can you break that? And they're like, "No." That part of the playtesting was done. Then it was it actually fun? And then you
Right.
switch over to that part. And
It's
it
not
was-
just a math worksheet.
Yeah. It always seems to start as one of those
Yeah.
for me anyway. It always starts as some kind of Excel spreadsheet, and then
Yeah.
you spin it out
Right.
from there.
That makes
The,
sense.
the numbers have to be right at first, for sure.
Right.
So let's talk about IPs, intellectual properties. So there's several games that Japanime Games brings over from Japan, where we localize them from Japanese game designers. There's also some games that are based off of different anime that we work with, and these aren't all of our games, or these are not all our games out here. There's some that are actually Linvander Studios, which are friends of mine that are game designers, but you can see the Cowboy Bebop and the Buffy game. And then the Robotech games listed there are ours. But just to talk a bit about working with licensors. So that's something I've done quite a bit with, and something that Dave has experience with as well, working with Harmony Gold, the rights holder for Robotech. And so, Dave, do you have any input on what are the benefits of working with a licensor, and what are the detriments?
So, I mean, working with a license is great because people know what it is. To the degree people know what it is varies. There's a difference between Robotech and Star Wars. It's a massive change, but you're going to find the audience in this. So you get some cachet from dealing with a license, but you also, everything I've done related to the IP I don't own. So I'm most licensors, whatever you produce, when your license expires, they walk away with it. You don't. I mean, obviously, we talked the other day. They can't control your mechanics. Game mechanics aren't copyrightable or protected or any of those things. So, but like we did it. We produced all the art. We've done everything related to it. And when I let the license expire, it's not mine anymore. It isn't mine now, but it's my idea, my concept, and my thing. And so, some of the challenges that come with that is they have to prove everything. you may have an idea in your head like this would be fantastic, and if there's something about the way you built what you're doing they don't like, and it could be a core to the mechanic, if they just don't like how it makes their licensed characters do something, they'll say no, and you're like but no. And that's where the challenge comes. But they also, like, we've been working with Tommy at Harmony, and the positive also is they're the masters of that property, and they'll say, here, do this with the art, and it'll look better, and it does. Or remember, this character would do this thing, and a couple times it spawned mechanics or things in the game that made it more thematic. So it's a balance. You have less control, but you get more input from somebody who's truly an expert on the property you're working with. Now we're dealing with Sony's lawyers too, so.
Right, that's more fun. I'm actually going to see Tommy next week in Denver, so let me know if you want me to pass anything along. But I'm going to NDK in Denver next week, another anime convention. But another thing about working on IPs, you're using quite often their artwork as well, which I find to be a benefit if I'm saving money and not having to buy all the new artwork myself. In Dave's case, he did unique new artwork or revamped some of the old artwork, which was still a lot of work. But in the case of Kamigami Battles, where we commissioned all that artwork from Japanese artists, we now own that art because that's the way our contracts were set up. And now I can use that art for anything we want, for advertisements, for playmats, card sleeves, whatever we want to do with it. Whereas if I were to do a Robotech playmat, I have to pay royalties on that. It's nice to be able to just have that freedom to do whatever you want. And it's not just the game itself. Any kind of marketing materials, you have to run by and get approval from the studio and make sure they're okay with all of that, and it just draws things out. And it looks cool when you're using a license and you've got something like Robotech or Cowboy Bebop or whatever, but it's extra work, it's extra time, and obviously it's royalties that you end up paying on all of that stuff too. Brett and I are working on a project right now for Love Live, which we're both very excited about. And it's what we expect to be one of our biggest games next year, but it's a lot of work working. We're working with Funimation, we're working with Bandai Namco, we're working with Bushiroad, and we have to do a lot of work getting approvals with all these different companies that are associated with it. Brett, do you have anything you'd like to share about that project?
It'll be an interesting one. So, obviously with Love Battle, there wasn't an IP involved, and because I was pitching it to publishers, that was the reason why I chose to not put an IP on it, because when you're coming to publishers with an idea that has an IP attached, the first thing they're going to ask you is, well, do you own the rights to that IP? Because if not, they have to go negotiate those rights and pay for them, and which has been a lot of the process that we've been doing, for Love Live, is they want to know what's the game going to be about, what are you going to use, what do we need to provide you, how much, what products are you going to create with that license, what are the financial outlook, all those things.
Brett's just like, I want to make a game. I just want to make a game.
Yeah, right? It's like I want 9 girls doing things in a game.
Well, you can be more descriptive than that. But anyway.
You all familiar with Love Live? Anybody? Yeah. So
A little bit.
Sunshine.
It's pop idol
Yeah.
concept. I mean, it's really pretty cool because these girls that are in the band, they do live performances. They're also the same voice actors or actresses, whatever, that are in the anime. And then they have a persona that they're all playing as these characters in the anime. And then there's the digital version in the mobile game, and
the
it's
songs
all
are all
interconnected.
done by the same performers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's as they say, huge in Japan, and they also come play live concerts at Anime Expo every year. And we're hoping if we can get working on this soon that we'll actually release the game at Anime Expo next year, which would be very cool.
That's the plan. And we're starting with Love Live Sunshine, since
That's the current license, Love Live Sunshine, and then we would backtrack and do Love Live afterwards. Jason, I know that you went to the licensing expo this year.
Yeah.
And so there's a licensing expo, the licensing expo in Las Vegas every year. Is a great way to find companies to work with to get rights to working with their characters and things like that. So that was your first trip there, right?
It was, yeah. It was interesting to talk to companies who may or may not want a board game made for their property. Some are, oh yeah, we would love a board game. Let's talk. And others are just kind of like, we don't care. Here's our card. So.
Or they might just be like, we have no time to talk to you.
Right. Yeah.
It's hard. They don't want to make meetings during the expo and making that contact beforehand, setting up the meetings. The first time I went to licensing expo, I couldn't get anybody to talk to me. They're just like, I don't know who you are. Go away.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and I'm in the process of talking with a licensor right now on a Netflix property, so for a board game, and so that's been interesting seeing how that's unveiled and the terms involved and all the things. So it's looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You thinking you are going to move forward on that?
Still not certain.
Yeah.
But I think so. I mean, even if my thinking is that if people are, it's an older, just an FYI, it's an older Netflix series. So the buzz has kind of died down, I guess you could say, and people aren't into it as much anymore. The age group that was the fan base anyway. But my thinking is that if people aren't understanding what the IP is, if they're not familiar with it, that it is it's a cool property, a cool theme, and it would be a good game anyway, right?
So you think it would be good whether they knew what that
Yeah,
IP was anyway?
I think so.
Well, that's great if you have something that people, without even knowing what it is. Kind of a hurdle we always have is people that don't know anime well that see our games, whether they're actually based on an anime or not, think, well, that game's just a reskin of something else, or just some stupid game they made based off of some anime or whatever. Like Heart of Crown is our best-selling game right now, and it's not based off of an anime. It's done by a Japanese game designer and a great set of artists. And sometimes people are like, I don't know what that anime is, I'm not interested. And I'm like, it's not an anime, it's just a damn good game. Happens to have some Japanese artists on it. I mean, obviously, it would have to have something to do with Japan for us to publish it, but that sometimes is something we have to get past in people's minds. They assume it's not necessarily a great game, it's just the license behind it. But that license also draws a lot more attention. So, for instance, Cowboy Bebop is something that's very much a classic. And another thing to consider when you are working with an IP, they generally say it should have been at least 5 years old because there's so many flash in the pan kind of things. I don't really know the current level of interest, but Tokyo Ghoul, really, really hot a couple years ago, and I was just offered a card game for this, and I'm like, well, that could be cool, but it's not nearly what it was a few years ago. So generally, doing something like Cowboy Bebop, Evangelion, something that's been around a long time that has a super big fan base, is a really good way to go, and that's the direction we'd like to go with most things. Anyway. What's next? Oh, hey, what's so great about me? This is our party here at Gen Con we do every year, where we bring in a bunch of industry friends, and that's actually, near the center off to the right is me with a bow tie, because we were celebrating our release of Tanto Cuore 5, which has butlers. And then that's Fukumoto, the owner of ArcLight, a company we do a lot of business with out of Japan. And so we always have a whole lot of fun there at Gen Con, and we're talking about doing more parties at anime conventions too, as being a fun thing to do with our Kickstarter backers, adding fun things like that. And the other picture there is my friend Daniel Zayas. He is the king of selfies. If you were in the game industry in any kind of way, you have been in a selfie with Daniel Zayas. But that's Brett and Charisse and I behind Daniel, and I'm actually going to see Daniel next week in Denver. He lives in Denver, and I'm sure we'll be posting many selfies. We will.
That's true.
Hey, Brett, how do you like working with Japanime Games?
It's great.
Excellent. Good answer.
No, so like from a perspective of people who are just getting started in game design, whether it's as a hobby or looking to break into the industry, hooking up with a publisher who is in the market for the kind of games that you're creating is the best thing you can do. Like when you're trying to find a target for who you're going to have create your game for you, then you want to pick the person that's most likely to have that game.
Was that me?
I think so.
I think it was me.
I think so, yes. And definitely in the instance of Love Battle High School, Japan Anime Games was my first choice. So it worked out well.
That worked out.
It
Yes,
did,
yes.
And it has worked out since, and obviously now.
And now
because
we're
of
working on more things
yes,
together.
Because of that relationship, we have established a connection, and that we can help each other do the things we enjoy doing. So
Yeah, Brett's actually gone with me to quite a few anime conventions this summer too, and been a lot of fun hanging out. I took him to Chicago and Madison and Toronto, to different anime conventions we were traveling to, and that was fun. Didn't go to UK Games Expo with me though.
no, next time.
Next time, okay.
The comments flourish.
And so I'm not working with Dave currently. We might work together at some point, but I hope that if we do, you'll enjoy the experience.
I'm almost to the point where self-publishing is getting really exhausting.
I wonder about that,
Yeah,
being the designer and the publisher and all of
And
that.
all of the things.
Yes, all of the things.
Right,
Really,
right.
the only thing I don't do is the actual art because I can't draw.
Okay.
My artists find it absolutely hilarious because for me, it's about I know what I want it to look like. I just can't draw it. And so I'll draw stick figures and take pictures with my phone.
Cyanide and happiness?
I'm just like, it should be shaped like this and fit in this box. Go. And then they send me all the art, and I'm the guy that sits at the computer, and I take the card shape and file and the layout and the art, and I put it together, and then I do all of that. I publish everything to the factory. I mean,
Mhm.
all of it except literally drawing the pictures.
Right.
And yeah, there's
Even the
days-
layout and graphic design
Yep.
stuff. Wow.
Yeah, the only thing I cheat on is the manual. I've got a guy in South Africa that I go, here's the rules, here's a bunch of art. Just do something. Like right now, we're working on Invid Invasion, which is the third Robotech game. I said, make the manual look like a Cyclone maintenance manual, because I had in my head the art, the Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance ran
Nice.
through my head that day.
Okay.
I said, so when we did Crisis Point, I said, make it look like Dana Sterling's school book learning to work with the Army of the Southern Cross. So in the margins, there's all these scribbles like she was
Oh,
writing it.
nice.
So I just tell him, I said, here's the box. And I will tell anybody who works with artists, the more leeway you can give them to be themselves, the more you'll get from them for the same amount of money.
Sure, sure.
You know,
Oh, yeah,
and
that's true.
I'm just like, go. I said, as long
Because
as
they
you
want to be
stay-
creative.
Yeah, as long as you stay in this box and don't wander off over here, fine. If you want to wander off over there, I won't pay you for that unless I like it. You know? And so that's what we do. That I have 5 artists all over the world, and I just kind of parse it out and let them do their thing. And even with working with Harmony, it's been pretty good. I get a couple of the artists get a little overly zealous, and then Tommy's like, dial it back. Just,
Oh, yeah.
you know, because
Because they have a look that they want to
yeah,
adhere to.
Yeah, that's one of
Right.
the things with the IP is like I really like the style the guy does because it's. I was telling you the other day, it was it looks super overchromed, like the
Mm-hmm.
metal all looks overchromed, and Tommy's like, we can't. That's just a little he
Too
goes,
shiny?
You need to be between this, and I forget what he said, and Shadow Chronicles. It's got to be somewhere in this here. And so all the guy did, and I told the artist, just dial it back 20%, and boom, we're done. It was nice, but letting them just run gets you, like with my manual designers. I'm not a graphic designer. I know how I want to flow, and I know I want things, and I want a overall thing, and I just kind of go, here, get back to me in a month. But yeah, I'm getting to the point where it's like, I'm kind of tired.
So
So
This-
maybe a partnership in the future.
maybe, yeah. I mean, this isn't just about working with Japan Anime Games. That's not really the point of that question. It's about working with a publisher. So game designers, a lot of them are self-publishing because, I mean, they're got a design, got an idea. A lot of them have graphic design skills as well, and they can throw it up on Kickstarter and maybe get enough funding to actually produce it and sell it maybe. That's the biggest challenge, to be quite honest. You can make a game, you can make a Kickstarter campaign, you can get money, but how are you going to sell that game? The problem is that there's thousands of games being released every year, and distributors and retailers can't keep up with that. So working with a publisher is a good way to get a foot in the door to get that product into distribution and into retailers. Generally speaking, if you aren't currently working with a distributor, it's practically impossible. Unless you walk up and have something amazing, they're probably not going to listen to you. So that's a big incentive to working with a publisher rather than self-publishing.
And really, to simplify even further what he said, just because you successfully made your game on a Kickstarter is not the same as publishing.
Yeah.
It really isn't.
There's more work involved.
Yeah, I mean, you can, like even when we did our first one, hey, we made a
So, what else did we have on here? Oh, Q&A. But, so we've got a schedule. We're doing a whole bunch of stuff here as Japanime Games with different products of ours. And we've got some things scheduled here on Friday, Saturday, and then I've got another slide for Sunday and Monday because we are doing so many things. And it's a 4-day con. But so we're actually obviously wrapping up Saturday at this point. So this is the last thing on that schedule. So let's just look at Sunday, Monday. We've got a couple of panels still, one panel each day. Tomorrow there's one about Game Market, which is the largest game convention in Japan, where I had my crew go interview some of the game designers that go to Tokyo Game Market and talk about game design in Japan. And it's interesting to see their perspective and see that event. And then the last day, we've got a panel just about me, basically. We're talking about the history and the past, present, and future of Japanime Games, where basically we'll just talk about what I have done, where I'm going, and if people have like more direct questions about Japanime Games, that's a good time for that. We've got different game schedules for some of our different games up in the tabletop room on the 38th floor. Terrifying Girl Disorder, the great game with a funny name, and Dynamite Nurse, it's all about sexy nurses, and Kamigami Battles, several different games that we'll be showing off. And then, of course, all these games are available to demo in our booth, too, in the exhibit hall on the second floor. But does anybody have any questions about game design, about the game industry, about games? About what we're doing for dinner tonight. Anything.
We got about 10 minutes, so.
I know you want to do a question.
All right.
All right, so I guess I could ask you like 100 questions, but
Let's start with one.
As a hobbyist and somebody who has a day job and everything, what I have this sci-fi game that I run every other week with some friends. Essentially, that's really what it comes down to. Now I've done all sorts of game mechanics for it, et cetera, et cetera. I guess y'all were talking about IPs earlier, so you've heard the expression, good artist copy, great artist steal, right? I mean, so where do you draw the line, or how do you decide? Okay, this is truly mine, and I can say that I developed this, and I shouldn't have to worry about somebody coming in and saying that I stole it from them or whatever.
So are you talking about art or gameplay
art,
mechanisms?
even game mechanics, even the game design itself.
Mechanics are completely unprotectable for the most part. I mean, so, and most of all of us who do this, I mean, I've been doing it for almost 6 years, and very rarely is anybody going to steal from you or accuse you of stealing. A lot of times it comes down to story, art, the things that are truly artistic about what we do is what's really protectable. So you got to be, I mean, if you completely lift something, people will point at you and have a whole conversation about it. But I mean, you have a little more experience with I do. I've seen
It's
a few
kind of funny
things,
as you were
but
saying that. I was thinking about deck building games.
Yeah.
So obviously Dominion is the grandfather of deck building games, and it was maybe a year and a half after Dominion came out that Tanto Cuore was developed. And this friend of mine from Japan was telling me, Eric, there's this new game from Japan, and it's shameful. It's just a total copy of Dominion, and it's called Tanto Cuore. I'm like, I know, I'm publishing it. And and he's like, well, it's so bad. And I'm like, no, actually, it's a good game, and there's new components to it. It's not a rip-off. It took some mechanics and added to it. And I'll honestly say, most people tell me that they think Tanto is better than Dominion because it's got the ability to thin out your deck, take cards out of your deck, keep them in play, and change things around. So people appreciate that. Dominion, of course, has had many expansions, and we love to pay homage to Dominion, but things can be improved on when you take something that somebody built and make it different, better, hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, think of like how many like Werewolf, Mafia, like all those social deduction
few.
type games there are, and they all basically play the same. It's just maybe it's like, oh well, this one adds a fucking vampire, or like
Mine has mine has cat girls.
yeah, yes, Camo Mimi Panic has cat girls. So, but yeah, I mean, they're all gonna feel sort of the same, but maybe you're changing the theme, or maybe you're tweaking a mechanic, or maybe you're adding an additional mechanic that makes it your own.
Like yeah, I mean like deck. So I've never published a deck builder, but it is my absolute favorite mechanic in the world. Mostly because I usually can find a way to break them, and I really enjoy doing that. And so I actually have designed it. So the challenge becomes deck builder is a deck builder. I mean, it's not like there's a big wide highway of how you do deck building. And we recently, when we were working with the Robotech concept, we actually came up with a way to do a Robotech deck builder that's done in a way that no deck builder has ever been done before.
So you think.
Oh, no, trust me. One of the benefits of, like, one of my friends, he's got 1,700 board games in his house.
Mm-hmm.
He is literally the most know-everything guy I've ever seen. So it's
Every designer should have one of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I always go, here's this idea. And when his face goes, I've never heard that before. And I go, ooh. But it's like, it's a deck builder. So this is maybe one of those things to talk about sometime. Deck builder for somebody like me who is just me, there's too much of it to test the way I do my games because it doesn't have a lot of strict math. And like, I'll tell you, like you probably, nothing is worse than finding a progressive math break in your game where a linear function becomes a progressive multiplicative function. It'll break your game so fast it's not even funny, and you have to also learn the limitations of what you're doing. Like, so I can't. The deck builder is too hard for me to test on my own because there's too many ways. The math can just
Too many
run away
branching
from
paths.
you.
Well, yeah, like a trading card game.
Yeah,
is
like Magic.
Tons of work.
Yeah, and so as long as you find something that you like and ask some people, does this smell or look like a direct ripoff? And if nobody says yes, then make it your own and have a good time with it. That's my advice.
There's literally only about 3 dozen game mechanisms that exist, and like Eric said, just 1,000 games every year or more, right? Just tons of games that come out. So all those games are going to use those mechanisms in some way, some combination or whatever. And that's kind of where you can be creative on how to make yours stand out, like how you use those mechanisms and how they you can combine, how they interact with the theme. But yeah, people don't usually say, "Oh, this game is amazing. It has this going on. Let's take that and use it in our game." That usually doesn't happen. So, which is good about our industry.
And I do it the other way. I find bits and pieces from games I like, and then it's all about how can I lock
Piece
this
them together,
together
yeah.
and say, okay, I enjoyed this from this game, this from this game, this game. How do I put all 3 of those in the same game so it should be theoretically 3 times as fun? It usually isn't, but
Is that how that math
that's the
works?
theory when you're doing it.
Do you have 99 more questions? Or?
And a bitch ain't one.
Yeah, I don't think I can talk that fast. So.
But 30 to 55 of them are feral pigs.
Anybody else have any questions about games or things or Japan?
You know you do. You got the face.
Yeah. He's got the question twitch.
So especially with publishing yourself, if you don't have a publisher, how hands-on do you have to be in terms of ordering games, getting them to retail outlets? Like, do you have to get stuff shipped to your house?
So
and then mail it
technically,
out?
I'm actually kind of like him. I actually work with Flat River Group, so they're also the Impressions / Flat River Group. So I also work with an aggregator,
Which is
as
another
well.
consolidator.
Yeah, consolidator aggregator.
Yeah.
And so when I wasn't working with them, so my first 4, so it took me 4 published games before I convinced them to work with me. I kept going, hey Aldo, hey Aldo, hey Aldo, like every 3 months. And finally went, okay, you're serious. Yeah, that's why I call you every 3 months. But for the first 4 games, I had access to get some stuff to stores. So that was, I had to work with the import company. I had to work with the shipping company. I had to work with the factories in China. And I mean, I did all of, yes, as a publisher, I will tell you the hardest parts to learn is finding a good freight company that gets stuff through customs, that doesn't sit in customs for weeks at a time. You know, finding a factory that you can work with that is responsive, good pricing. You have to do all of those things. Obviously, Eric removes a lot of that as a publisher. If you know other people have to do it, me as myself, I do all of those things, and it's exhausting.
One of the first questions I ask designers that come up to me and ask about Kickstarter and self-publishing, I ask them, how much do you enjoy customer service and logistics and overseas shipping issues, and how much time do you want to spend on those things versus designing?
Yeah.
Is that a skill set that you want to develop? Because, like you said, you're going to get your hands into all of it.
I have a 2-car garage. Half of it is a warehouse.
Yeah. So for me, it was like, no, I don't want to do any of that.
And Jason, when you started out with Montana, was that or Gondola was before that? Were you selling through a consolidator or anything? No.
No.
And did you get into distribution?
No, it was not until I think last summer is when we got hooked up with distribution.
Okay.
Maybe 2 years ago, I can't remember. But
Mhm.
obviously, when you just have 1 or 2 products, it's going to be really difficult
Right.
to get into distribution unless the product is a huge hit, right?
Mhm.
Then they'll want to pick it up. But the more you have in your catalog, the more likely they are to be interested in what
Sure.
you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's about it for today, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow at noon to talk about Game Market. All right, thanks for coming. Oh, I'm sorry. At 5 tomorrow. I was looking at Monday. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.